It's chapter 6, Ephesians chapter 6, and we continue our work through this epistle of Paul, and we're into the final chapter here. Pretty familiar passage, again, because in our circles, we want kids who will behave and all that. The parents know this verse, right? Children, obey your parents in the Lord. We're going to look at this section, and so we want to look at that. I will note, just by way of tying some things together here, we are in the fifth walk section. There are 5 walk this way, don't walk this way sections. We're in the fifth and final one, and it began back at chapter 5, verse 15, where it says walk circumspectly, or we're calling it walk wisely, how to apply the Christian principles in your daily activities. And from there, this section develops different ideas out of that. That fifth one, walk circumspectly or walk wisely, chapter 5, verse 15, is further explained in a couple of things. I think in verse 17, 18, it says in chapter 5, verse 18, don't get drunk with wine, that's debauchery, but instead be filled with the Spirit. And that is part of the description or part of the guidelines or the instructions on what it means to walk wisely or walk circumspectly. Out of that one comes 4 instructions in verses 19 and following. There are 4 participles or 4 activities that define, describe, and develop a Spirit-filled life. Verse 19, it says addressing or speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Second one is a pair, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Third one is giving thanks always. And the fourth one is submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And so we have 4 activities that they are subordinate to the main idea here of being filled with the Spirit, of having a Spirit-filled life. And so these 4 both define or describe what this will look like, a Spirit-filled life, and they tell us how to accomplish it. We're developing that last one, the submitting to one another love, and it actually covers 3 pairs of relationships. The first one we looked at last week, which is the husband and wife pair, the marriage pair. The one today, chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, is still developing. It's still giving instruction or illustration. It's really more than illustration because it's a command. It's not just telling us about it. It's telling us what to do. But that pair is parents and children. And then the final one, and I think we'll get to it in a 2 or 3 weeks. We've got some other speakers and events coming up. But is the slave master, or in our setting, our culture, would be probably the work relationship, boss and employee kind of thing. And so we'll get there in due course. But I mentioned that's kind of the picture, that's the structure, the logical structure, if you're outlining, this is what's going on in this passage. And I notice a couple of things, since we're in this middle one, marriage, home, and then work, we're in the home one. I notice a couple of things, some patterns in all 3. There's enough of them, with 3 of them we can get a pattern. Number 1, a broad statement that God has a system of authority or a chain of command in every sphere of life. None of us are above anything. None of us are above everybody. We have someone that we look up to. We have someone that we give account to. And so there are spheres of authority. These spheres do differ. So the relationship, the submission-authority relationship between a wife and a husband is different than it is between a parent and a child. And I'd mentioned that last week. The word that's found there in the section on marriage is the word submit. And it has the idea of yielding. That's a pretty good idea of yielding, of coming together under your husband, of working with him kind of thing. And the broader, in the ideal setting, that which is Christian, biblical, and that practice of marriage to which all of us who are believers want to attain, it is not an authoritarian issue where the husband is the head of the home and therefore his word is law. That's not the kind of atmosphere we're trying to develop. While the Bible does say that, as far as he is the head of the home, the atmosphere that we want to cultivate is a partnership. That's the deeper issue of marriage. It is a oneness. In fact, that's in the text there, verse 30, 31, 32. Therefore, a man will leave his father, cleave to his wife, and they will become one. There's a oneness. And so there is a together. That's the ideal. Now, we are fallen creatures, so there, even in Christian homes, there's a tendency for the wife to not want to submit, to want to take authority. There's an inclination in some homes for the man to want to grab the authority and be a bully. And I'm saying the principle is husband is head, he leads lovingly. That's his job. That is his assignment. And the wife is to submit as to the Lord. But the ideal is when there is this unity, this oneness, not just the sexual union, one flesh, but a oneness in all things. They become together one. And if you can picture it this way, if this helps, is kind of cartoonish, I suppose. A brood of a husband who says, "I'm the leader. God told me to lead, and what my word is law." And so, kind of the caveman cartoon picture where he's this muscular guy with small brain or whatever, and he's dragging the woman along by the hair because he's the leader. That's not biblical. That is neither ideal nor biblical. The whatever you would picture for that, the opposite of that, what the ideal is the husband recognizes before Christ, I am under you, Christ, you are my head, and I'm the head of this home, but I walk with my wife next to me hand in hand. We walk together down life's road. That's the closer picture, if that helps you. When we come to the other pattern you notice is in each one of these, the one who is to submit is listed first. So it's wife first, child first, slave first. And then the one in authority in that sphere is listed second. The difference between wife and child, beyond what I've just described, is the words are different. It is submit, that is yield. And they're in an ideal marriage, or one that is working in that direction. The husband listens to his wife. The wife has good counsel. If you were smart enough to marry a good woman, a woman from the Lord, then it would make sense to listen to their wisdom. They too walk with Christ. They too know God. And God has shown them some things. They have expertise in different areas. And so if you're the kind of guy who says, I know everything, my wife doesn't know anything, you're a fool, all right? You're an idiot. The ideal is to work together. But it's that word submit or yield, to work together, but with a submissive spirit on the part of the wife. With the children, the word changes to the standard word that we use for obey. And so, in fact, I was just having a little chat with my kids. They asked what I was preaching on, which they know by now that's not all, unless they have a little bit of time, that's not always the best question. But I mentioned to them, it's on children obey your parents. And I gave them this advice for when they get married and have kids, as God would bless. When you're teaching your children to obey, especially when they are very little, there's some age-appropriate things going on here, but when they're very little, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, you're not looking for them to submit, you're looking for them to obey. And it is not a real productive activity to get in logic arguments with 2-year-olds. It just doesn't go very far, all right? And not to be funny, we'll get into this a little more in the practical side, but for those parents, as we would teach from the Bible and give practical advice, a 2-year-old just needs to be told what to do, and then they need to do it. That's the picture. The age appropriateness is as they come up through. When you have, our youngest now, Brian will be 16 next month, so we've been at the parent thing for a bit. I'd like to be able to instruct Brian, give him an instruction or a command, and I expect obedience, but to give him some reasonings. He's 16. He needs, part of it is, we'll get to this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to not just raise babies who obey. We're trying to raise children to become teens, to become young adults who know God and love Him themselves, and that they have the ability to think through things for themselves. And so we'll kind of get into that a little bit here in the text. And so there's some patterns here in this. But I find this fascinating. So we want to look at this in two parts. You probably could see this. There's a children part and a parent part. And so we'll look at this. There's under verses 1 through 3, we have these issues. We have the two commands, actually. The main one, the first one is children, That is, parents and children. That's what we're talking about. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. So let's talk about that. That's verse 1. Let's talk about that for a moment. That is the central command. This is the living out, or the putting feet in motion to verse 5:21, chapter 5, verse 21, submitting to one another. In the home, this is what it looks like. Children, obey your parents. What does obedience look like? To what are we calling our children? We are calling them to hear the instruction and to do what we tell them. In fact, again, I use that kind of literal thing, but the literal rendition of the word obey from the Greek is the phrase in English, to hear underneath, to hear under. And so it is to hear and to do. And, we use those kind of examples, if you're really obeying in the military, or maybe in athletics, if you've been a coach or a player, and the coach says, start jumping. The team that's obedient will do what? They'll start jumping and they'll say, how high? How high do I jump? That kind of, how long, how high? That's what we're looking for, the obedience. All right. And so let's talk in some practical terms, though, because, and I know not all of you are actively parenting younger folks. A lot of you have moved past that stage. But there is some encouragement and some parallel instruction for you as grandparents. That this is what your kids who are raising their kids, your grandkids, are or should be doing. And as a grandparent, you don't want to interfere with that. You would not want to encourage disobedience, all right? You would not want to do that. You would want to assist in that. And I know there's all the jokes, I love being a grandparent because I can spoil the kids and then hand them back. Well, if that's working in your family, I am saying here there is a biblical principle. You don't want to interfere with your kids who are adults now, raising their own kids, your grandkids. You don't want to interfere with that process because your kids are commanded to raise the children to obey the Lord, to obey them and obey the Lord. And so let's talk for, again, practically obey. What's going on with obey? The simple form is to hear the instruction and to do it. We all understand that. Now, there are a few other things going on here. One is the fullness of this. In fact, it may be captured, this is right. Obey your parents in the Lord. There is a connection to our submission to Christ. And so when we talk about children obeying their parents, and all of us who are parents have experienced what I'm going to describe here, and that is we give an instruction to our child, go up to your room now, you're having trouble, go up to your room and sit quietly. And they obey in the sense that they head towards their room, but what they do is they stomp their feet on the way there, right? Or they throw their head, or they roll their eyes, or you fill in what your kids do. That is not, they may go upstairs, they obey, they did what they're told, they went to their room. But you and I understand that this concept of obedience includes not only fulfilling the command or the action, but it involves the heart attitude. In fact, I'll throw this out there that for you parents, for you grandparents, this actually fits with our Sunday school teachers. We're trying to assist this kind of thing in our Sunday school program with the kids. We're trying to teach them to love Christ and to obey Him. But the harder part, especially with a little child, it is not too difficult to get them to comply because you're physically stronger than they are. Put your pajamas on. No, I won't. Yes, you will. I wouldn't take the argument very far. You just put the pajamas on the child. They're only 2 years old. You can do it. But what we're really looking for, what God is looking for, is full obedience from the heart. And that's harder, isn't it? Those of you who are experienced parents, or maybe you already passed that stage, this will bring back memories where you were not only trying to get the kid to take the garbage out or go to bed or whatever it is you were saying, but you recognize, I need to work on their heart. I need God to work on their heart. And that is what we're really working on, is heart issues. It's not just outward compliance. It is an inward attitude of obedience and submission. And what the real thing that's going on here, this is why we have obey your parents in the Lord. Have you thought of it this way? What we are trying to teach them is not just obey me. I'm your dad. I brought you into this world. And there's some safety things. Listen to me when I talk to you about crossing the street or driving your car or using power tools. There's some safety things. More than that, we are actually trying to teach for them, and actually we are trying to model for them as dads how to rightly submit to Christ. You understand that the goal of raising children is not that when they're 16 or 19 or 28 or 58, that they still obey you. At some point, the normal procedure is they start their own family, and they are accountable not to you in obedience, but to whom? To the Lord. We are trying to bring them to the place where they obey us as a means. It helps the home run smoothly, don't get me wrong. But the real goal is that we're trying to teach them, here's how you obey God. And He has said you should obey me. That helps you to learn to obey Him. That's what's really going on. And so in your process of doing this, teaching them to obey, calling them to obedience, it is not just external functions or activities. It is working on the heart. And I'll tell you, both as a parent and as a pastor, in that sense, I'm trying to teach, not just show up to church. Just be here. That's all I want. Just show up to church. What I want is for you to come to church and actually worship from the heart. That's what we're all trying to do. The same thing with your children. You're trying to get them to obey God from the heart. The second one here is verse 2, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. The promise is drawn from the law, Exodus and Deuteronomy, that it'll go well with you. And so this idea of honoring. And there is actually an age thing here. Even when if you're an adult here, you've started your own family, and your parents are still alive, the setup isn't, you're not really called to obey them. You're no longer their child in an active sense. You're still born from them, but so you don't have to obey them. It's not like great grandpa rules everything or something. You have your own home that you stand before God, but there is still a responsibility to honor your parents. There's still a responsibility, a call to honor your parents. And that's going to go in a lot of ways. There's a lot of practical things with that, right? Living for Christ. If your parents are Christians, most honorably is if you live for Christ. But taking care of your parents, showing them respect, not arguing with them, not mocking them, not putting them down. I trust that's not what happens with you. We actually, just this week, have an example with the Blanchards of showing honor over many years. The care, and many of you have been through it or going through it now, of caring for an elderly parent. I won't put Debbie on the spot and ask her if she still obeyed her dad, because the right question would be, is, do you submit to your husband? But I won't put you on the spot. But in this text, chapter 6, it is honor your parents. And I think that Debbie and the other family, but Debbie I've gotten to see, honored her father by caring for him in his last days. That's a great example. There are other ways of doing that, but that's an ongoing thing of showing honor, respect, care, concern, and so on to our parents, even when we are in our own home and we're raising our own families for the Lord. We still honor our parents. That one keeps going. That one is ongoing. Now there is this thing I mentioned, because we have some young adults here, of varying capacities and so on. But they've got a whole group of them over here. That's kind of cool. But as they grow up, what's happening? The honor is going to go on. You need to honor your parents. And that means even when we're kind of, as we get older, we do make idiot mistakes still. You can still honor us, all right? You can still honor us in different ways. But the goal is, and there's 5 of you there, you're in that bracket where you're no longer little children, where the dad says or the mom says, do this or go to bed now or something. The goal in training you in the Lord is so that you are ready to stand before Christ yourself. And that's in the next phrase. If we go past obey and honor, we go to the parents, specifically the father. And he has a double command here. In verse number 4, Paul says this, fathers, do not provoke, do not exasperate, do not provoke your children to anger, to wrath. Instead, bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. All right? And so there is an instruction on the child's side. Children, obey. And then children, honor. And the honor keeps going. Even as an adult child, even as an adult, you honor your parents. But now let's talk about the fathers for a few minutes. There's some practical things here. I will notice a couple things. I'll make some observations for you here from the text. You'll notice above it says, children, obey your parents. And that's the right word. It's parent. That's the word for parents. Here it's fathers. This fits in with what we've been discussing is the husband, that is the father, is the responsible party in the family. And so we're being kind of specific here. We're being kind of technical or exacting. But in verse 4, it does not say parents, don't provoke your children. It says fathers. Fathers do this. Don't provoke, but instead raise them up. Now I will say there's an application for the mother. She's part of the team. She's part of the marriage, part of the home. But the instructions for the fathers, and I'm reminded that there are some specific instructions. Dads, if something's not going right with the kids, if things aren't going right in the home, if something's not right with the finances, if something's not right wherever, who is ultimately responsible in your home? It's dad. That's what it means. That's part of being the head of the wife, the head of the home. And that is an assignment. You don't get to pick or choose. It's not alternating years or, every third Friday. God has said, husbands, love your wives. You're the head of the wife. Fathers, dads, you are the head of the home. Here's what you need to do with your kids. Now the question is how well you're doing with that. The two instructions, one is a negative, a don't provoke to anger. There's some practical things here. How might a dad, in what ways might a dad irritate, exasperate, or provoke his children? Let me give you a few suggestions. How would we do that? Here are 2 or 3 things that I think make childhood difficult. Even from a man who knows God and loves God, but if he's doing these kind of things, it's provoking. It's anger provoking. One example would be this. When we as a dad are inconsistent in our discipline and standards. In other words, the kids don't know what we expect of them. And so one day they do something and you don't say anything and it's okay. And the next morning they do the same thing and you fire off at them. You yell at them, you discipline them, you ground them, whatever it is you're doing. And they're like, whatever. Can you imagine this? What if, as an adult, what if every other day gravity worked? If it was inconsistent. You went out one day to the car, and you start the car, and all of a sudden it starts to float away. And the next day it doesn't. You can drive to work. It'd be very inconsistent. How would we know what to do? When we are inconsistent in our standards or our discipline with our children, that is very disconcerting to a child. They don't know what to do with it. A second example, and you can probably come up with others, would be when we give unclear instructions. And we can make it into a humorous thing. You and I as dads or moms, we tell a child, I need you to clean your room this afternoon. And what you picture and what I picture in our minds, bed's made, all the clothes are put away, the dirty clothes are in the hamper, the floor's been vacuumed, whatever, those kind of things, right? I mean, that's what probably you picture. And the kids, what do they picture when we say clean your room? Depends on the size of the closet and how much room there is under the bed, right? Yeah, so the closet, shut the door. Anyways, we need to be clear in our instructions. I want you to do this, and this is how it needs to be done, and so on. And clear instructions. When we are unclear, and then get mad at them, and when we're unclear in our orders, and then get disappointed in them, it is difficult for them. It is provoking. A third one is, and this is one that bothers me. I've seen this in different settings, in sports or even around Christian schools and so on. Very irritating to me personally. But it provokes the child when the dad, in particular, never praises his child. I won't ask for a show of hands, because it's kind of a personal question at this point. But I'm going to guess there's more than one of you here who was raised in a home where the dad never said thank you and never said good job, son or daughter. I'm just telling you, if you are weak on that, this is one you need to work on. Your kids need to know that you love them unconditionally, and when you do something right or even half right, you need to tell them good job. And so those are some areas that are very practical. Fathers, do not provoke your children. How do we provoke them? When they have no idea where we're coming from. One day everything's calm and whatever they do is fine. The next day we're mad at them. We need set standards. We call them to follow Christ like we're trying to follow Christ. And we keep the standards even and steady. When we don't give clear instructions and when we never praise them. And we need to encourage our children. They need to be told, I love you, and hey, you did well on this. And the truth is, not every time do they do great. I mean, they're regular kids. But they need to know their parents are behind them. They need to know their dad loves them. And so that's the instruction on the next side. Do not provoke to anger, but instead bring up in the ESV has the discipline and instruction. Interesting couple words here. This is the raising process. This is the child rearing mechanism. And the mothers are included, but it is addressed to fathers again. Don't provoke them to anger. Instead, bring them up, raise them, bring them along in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And so there's a couple words here that include the ideas of discipline. That first word particularly is discipline training. There is an aspect of correction. There is an aspect of setting goals. There's an aspect of moving them forward, giving them guidance and so on. But raising them in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord is interesting. Do you notice this little section, they're to obey their parents in the Lord, and the parents, the father in particular, is to raise them up in the instruction of the Lord. And that reminds me, that takes me back to this, the whole thing is about not just them obeying you. That is the presenting issue. That's practical. Our families run better when the husband loves his wife and the kids obey the parents. I mean, that God has designed it that way. But there's a bigger picture going on here, and that is we are aiming not just at having kids that comply with our instructions. We want their hearts to be right with God. And that's where there's a couple goals here, a couple principles we could mention. This whole thing of obedience, submission, particularly here with the children, obedience to the parents is necessary for them to learn full obedience from the heart to the Lord. And it's the same thing we mentioned before. If there's a child, whether they're 2 or 12 or 22, whatever, and they're disrespectful or they're disobedient to their parents, but they're trying to claim, I'm right with God, that isn't how this works. The way our relationship is built with God it is lived out in our relationships day by day. And so the goal of this, of parenting, is not just to have kids that don't embarrass us when we're out grocery shopping. The goal of Christian parenting is not just to have kids that, look good in a suit and tie and know how to smile at people. It is we want them to learn to obey us fully from the heart, including their attitude, so that they begin to learn, and they're in the process of learning to obey God from the heart. Do you know your kids, because you've seen it, you give them an instruction, they don't like it, right? You've done that. Give them, I need you to do this or stop doing that, and they're not happy with it. They don't agree with it. But God's working in their heart and they try and obey. And it's hard for them. They don't like the decision. They don't like the command. Do you know you and I face the same thing as adults? We come to the Word of God, and God confronts us and says, there's something in your life, in your heart, in your attitude that isn't right, and I want you to change it. I'm telling you that I'm God, I'm your heavenly Father, and you need to do this differently. And what we want in our own lives and in our kids' lives is for us to learn to say, God, this is hard, I need your help. but I want to submit. I need to obey you. Help me to do that from the heart. And so that's what's going on. That's the deeper picture of what's going on in the home. The second one here is leadership. This is just a side note throw in here. We can develop this sometime later. But this whole thing here, leadership, and the Bible seems to present the concept of servant leaders, leaders who are servants. And this principle, and this goes for our young people, but it goes for all of us, you will never learn, you will never be able to lead well if you have not learned to obey well, to follow well. Rebellious people don't make good leaders. They have never learned to submit. And so there's a principle here. We can develop that later. I just throw that in there. The last one here is, this is the big picture, this chapter 4, 5, and 6. Our relationship with the Lord, our walk with God that's described through these chapters is lived out in regular human relationships. Things with one another, in church, in the home, in marriage. This is where we develop it. This is how we live out the Christian life. The Christian experience, the Christian walk is not some heavenly, we kind of sit there and think about heaven, and that's Christian living. It's not just ethereal or theoretical. It's actually lived out in how a husband loves his wife, how children obey their parents, and how dads raise their kids, not provoking them, but raising them in the instruction and discipline of the Lord. And so may God help us to do that. The church fits in there too. Part of our education ministry, part of our discipleship ministry is to aid and abet that process, to assist it along. Teaching parents from the Word to be better parents, teaching children to know Christ and to love Him first of all. And so there's a lot going on. May God help us to do that. Take your hymn books if you would. We're going to sing a song here.